The storm had buried Blackwood Ridge before sundown. Snow drove sideways through the stone valley hard enough to skin bark from the pines. It packed against the windows of Silas Thornton's house until the glass turned white. The chimney groaned. Wind shoved at the roof beams like a man trying to break his way inside. Silas stood before the hearth with one hand braced on the mantel. Firelight caught the scar running from his left temple to the corner of his mouth. It pulled tight whenever his jaw worked. Tonight it looked carved deeper. Coffee boiled black in an iron pot. He did not pour it. A wagon stopped outside. No call, no knock. The door flew inward and a woman stumbled through with snow in her hair. Silas caught the door before the wind tore it from its hinges. He drove it shut with his shoulder and dropped the bar into place. Eleanor Vance stood dripping on his floor. Her wool coat had gone dark with melted snow. Her lips carried no color. One glove was split at the thumb, and the bare skin beneath had turned raw and red. 10 years had changed the shape of her face. It had not changed her eyes. She held a folded paper against her breast. Silas looked at it before he looked at her. "The marshal said I was to bring this." Her voice scraped thin from the cold. Silas took the paper. His fingers brushed hers. Eleanor pulled back as though the touch had burned. He opened the contract and read words he already knew. Her dead husband's debts. The territorial prison order. The transfer of obligation. Marriage in place of confinement. At the bottom sat Silas Thornton's name. His own hand had put it there 3 days earlier. "You bought the debt," she said. "I did." "Why?" The fire snapped between them. Silas folded the paper once, then again. "Prison would kill you before spring. That answer ain't enough. It is the one you get." Her chin lifted though her teeth struck together beneath her closed mouth. 10 years before, she had stood beneath a cottonwood tree wearing a blue ribbon at her throat. She had promised to meet him at the chapel. By dusk, she had been aboard a railway coach beside Horace Vance, a man with polished boots and enough money to buy judges. Silas had waited until the lamp oil burned dry. Now she stood in his house with a marriage contract and one battered trunk. "Where do I sleep?" she asked. He pointed toward the small room beside the kitchen. "My room, yours, and you barn loft." Her eyes moved to the frost gathered along the doorframe. "You'll freeze." "I have before." That struck somewhere beneath her ribs. He saw it in the way her fingers tightened around the handle of her trunk. She carried it across the room without asking for help. The weight dragged one shoulder lower than the other. Wet wool, bitter coffee, and wood smoke crowded the cabin until Silas could taste the old years in his mouth. At the bedroom door, the trunk slipped. He caught the far handle. For one breath, they held it together. Her hand rested inches from his. "You still take your coffee burnt," she said. Silas let go. "You still notice things that ain't yours to notice." She bent her head and pulled the trunk inside. He turned toward the hearth before she could see his hand close around the silver chain beneath his shirt. The knock came hard enough to shake snow from the rafters. 3 blows, then 2 more. Silas lifted the rifle from the wall. When he opened the door, Sheriff Amos Vale stood on the porch with 4 armed men behind him. Snow clung to his mustache. A strip of paper snapped in his fist. Vale smiled and shoved the notice against Silas's chest. "By order of the Territorial Court." Silas read the first line. "Seizure of Blackwood Ranch." His eyes moved lower. "Contaminated water. Public danger. 7 days to surrender land, livestock, and all attached property." Behind him, Eleanor came out of the bedroom. Vale looked past Silas and grinned. "Seems you bought yourself a wife and lost yourself a ranch in the same week." Silas raised his eyes from the page. "Who filed it?" Vale stepped back into the storm. But the man behind him answered. Elias Thorne sat mounted beneath the dead cottonwood, wrapped in a black buffalo coat, smiling as snow gathered on the brim of his hat. And from the cattle pens beyond the house came the first long, choking bellow of something dying. The bellow came again. Silas shoved the seizure notice into Vale's chest and ran for the pens. Snow struck his face like thrown sand. Eleanor followed, lifting her skirts clear of the drifts. By the time she reached the lower corral, Silas was already on his knees beside a red heifer. White foam hung from the animal's mouth. Its legs kicked once against the frozen mud, then went still. 3 more cattle lay near the trough. Another staggered in a crooked circle, its breath coming in wet bursts. The water inside the trough carried a thin skin of ice broken where the animals had drunk. Silas plunged his hand into it. Eleanor caught his wrist. "Don't!" He looked at her fingers around him. She let go. Silas smelled the water from his palm. Metal. Mud. Something sharp beneath both. He wiped his hand on his coat and turned to the ranch hands. "Drive every standing head uphill. Keep 'em from the creek." "The north pasture's buried," one man said. "Then dig." They worked until daylight. Men broke frozen earth with picks. Silas hauled calves through waist-deep snow, one under each arm. Blood ran from his knuckles where the ice had split them. When a steer dropped near the gate, he put his shoulder beneath its neck and pushed until his boots slid backward through the muck. Eleanor carried hot cloths and buckets from the house. He never thanked her. By noon, 7 cattle were dead. By dusk, 11. The hides had gone stiff beneath the falling snow. A rider came down the ridge as Silas dragged the last carcass clear of the trough. Elias Thorne wore a clean black coat and gloves soft enough for church. His horse stepped high through the frozen ruts. He looked over the dead cattle. Hard sight. Silas kept pulling. Thorne dismounted and unfolded a paper. "I can take the place off your hands." Silas stopped. 7 days ain't much time," Thorne went on. "Court'll seize it. You'll walk away with nothing. Sell now, and you might keep enough to start somewhere else." He named a sum lower than the value of the cattle lying dead in the snow. Silas's scar drew tight. "You poisoned my water." Thorne smiled without showing teeth. "Careful. A man under court order ought not make wild charges." Eleanor stood near the barn door, a steaming kettle in both hands. Thorne's eyes moved to her. "Mrs. Thornton, you picked another poor investment." The kettle handle creaked beneath her grip. Silas stepped between them. "Get off my land. For now." Thorne mounted and rode away. That night, Silas sat alone at the kitchen table. Eleanor watched from the dark hall as he opened the ranch ledger. He counted the remaining stock, the feed, the mortgage. Then he drew out a second document and wrote beneath the oil lamp until the nib scratched dry. He sanded the page. A trust deed. Everything left, after seizure horses' equipment, money from sale placed under Eleanor Thornton's name. He signed it. Not once did he look toward her room. Eleanor pressed her knuckles against her mouth. 10 years ago, Silas had gone to the gallows shadow because of her. Now he meant to let Blackwood die so she would not. He folded the deed and placed it inside his coat. When he rose, she stepped back before the lamplight found her. Near midnight, the wind fell. Eleanor took the storm lantern, a small glass vial, and her old leather gloves from the trunk. She crossed the sleeping ranch alone. The creek wound black beneath shelves of ice. Upstream, the canyon narrowed between blue-gray walls. She knelt beside a stone where the current still moved and dipped her fingers into the water. A bitter sting caught beneath her nails. She lifted the lantern. Blue crystals clung to the rock like crushed glass. Eleanor brought one close to her nose. The sharp mineral reek reached the back of her throat. Her hand stopped shaking. She knew that color. She knew that smell. And she knew no spring in God's earth made copper sulfate by itself. Eleanor reached the house before dawn. Her skirts were stiff with ice. The blue crystals sat wrapped in oilcloth inside her glove. She barred the door behind her, set the lantern on the floor, and knelt beside the old trunk. The lock had rusted shut years ago. She took the fire poker and struck once. The brass plate bent. The second blow tore it free. Inside lay no gowns, no silver, no widow's keepsakes. There were glass tubes packed in wool, folded survey sheets, a small balance scale, bottles marked in Horace Vance's narrow hand. Beneath them rested a leather ledger, its corners dark from years of use. Silas appeared in the doorway. His shirt was open at the throat. Dried blood marked both hands. "What are you doing, saving your ranch?" He looked at the broken lock, then at the glassware spread across his table. "You know how to use that." Eleanor pulled off her gloves. The skin across her knuckles had split in the cold. "My husband owned mines from Nevada to the Dakota line. He trusted no man's figures but his own." "That don't answer me. He made me test ore because he said a wife could not steal what she did not understand." She placed a blue crystal in a spoon and held it above the lamp flame. The crystal darkened. A green edge flashed through the fire. Silas came closer. Eleanor filled 2 tubes with creek water. Into one she dropped a strip of treated paper. It turned red at the edges. Into the other she added clear ammonia from a stoppered bottle. The water bloomed deep blue. Silas's breath stopped. "Copper," she said. "Too much for any spring. Enough to burn the mouth, twist the gut, and kill stock that drink heavy. Could it come from the earth? Not like this." She opened the ledger. Years of figures crowded the pages. Soil layers, mineral seams, freight orders, rail weights. Dates Horace had forced her to copy until her fingers cramped. Silas touched one page. "You kept all of it. I kept what might one day bury the men who used it." The words left no room between them. Eleanor spread a survey map across the table and pinned its corners with coffee cups. Blackwood Creek ran down from the northern canyon. Above it, marked in faded red, sat an abandoned copper shaft, Thorn. Consolidated Claim Number 4. Silas leaned over the paper. "That mine closed 6 years ago. Closed mines still hold poison." She traced a finger from the shaft to the creek. "If Thorn poured copper salts into the drainage cut, snowmelt would carry it straight to your troughs." Silas's jaw hardened. "Can you prove he bought the chemical?" "Maybe." She turned deeper into the ledger. Horace had once supplied blasting powder and treatment salts to half the territory. Names and freight numbers ran in neat columns. Then she found it. E. Thorn, 12 casks blue vitriol, delivered to Blackwood Spur. The date was 3 weeks past. Silas read the line twice. "You had this all along. I had numbers. Now I have the water." He looked at her hands. Not soft widow's hands. The fingertips were rough. A pale burn scar crossed one palm. "What did he do to you?" Eleanor closed the ledger. "What men with money do when they mistake ownership for right." Silas reached toward her. The floor jumped. Glass tubes shattered. A roar rolled down from the canyon deep enough to shake soot from the chimney. The lamp flame bent flat. Then came the crack of stone breaking against stone. Silas seized Eleanor and drove her beneath the table as the north wall split from ceiling to floor. Outside, horses screamed. A second blast struck. The window burst inward. Silas pulled her through smoke and flying snow, one arm over her head. Beyond the yard, the canyon mouth vanished beneath a falling wall of rock. The creek disappeared first, then the road, then the only trail to the territorial court. Eleanor clutched the ledger against her chest. From the ridge above came 3 rifle flashes. Silas dragged her behind the water trough as bullets cut splinters from the barn. The ground broke beneath them. For one black second, Eleanor felt his hand lock around hers. Then the earth opened and Blackwood swallowed them whole. Eleanor woke with dirt in her mouth. She tried to breathe and struck stone with her forehead. No sky, no snow, No sound, but falling grit and the slow drip of water somewhere in the dark. Silas, her voice came back small. A match scratched. The flame showed his face less than a foot from hers. Blood ran from his hairline, crossed the scar on his cheek, and dropped from his jaw. He lay twisted beneath a slab, one arm pinned at the wrist. The match died. Eleanor crawled toward him on her elbows. The passage was scarcely high enough to lift her head. Wet stone pressed cold through her clothes. The air smelled of clay, burned powder, and fresh blood. "Can you move your fingers some? Then the bone may hold. You always talk like a doctor when a man's crushed." "Only when he argues." She found the fallen ledger beneath her hip, its leather cover torn but whole. The storm lantern was gone. One glass vial remained in her coat pocket. Silas shifted. His breath broke between his teeth. "Don't move. Rock's settling." "I said don't." Eleanor pressed both palms beneath the slab. It did not rise. Silas reached past her with his free hand and wedged a broken timber beneath the stone. "On 3. You'll tear the arm apart. Better than leaving it here." They pushed. The timber groaned. The slab lifted the width of 2 fingers. Silas ripped his wrist free. The stone fell hard enough to shake the passage. He rolled onto his back. Blood soaked through his sleeve from elbow to palm. Eleanor tore open the hem of her petticoat. Silas caught her hand. "That cloth's all you got between skin and winter. You still think you get to choose what I lose?" His grip loosened. She wrapped the wound tight. Her fingers worked fast, but each time the cloth darkened, she pulled harder. Silas watched her bent head. "Eleanor." She tied the knot with her teeth. 10 years, he said. "You left me standing at that chapel." Her hands stopped. There was no room to turn away. "I know. You married Vance before the week was out." "I know. He bought the judge who called me a murderer." Her breath caught against the stone. Silas waited. Eleanor lowered her forehead to his bandaged hand. "Horace bought more than the judge." Silas did not move. "He had 2 men swear you shot that rail guard. He had the rope measured before the trial began." "I was cleared because I married him." The darkness seemed to draw tighter. Eleanor's words came against his skin. He offered one bargain. His name on mine and the witnesses would change their tale. If I refused, you would hang before Sunday. Silas pulled his hand away. "No, I watched them build the gallows." "You could have told me." He said if I spoke your name, he would put the charge back before the court. Every year after he reminded me he still owned the men who lied. Silas struck the rock beside his head. Stone cut his knuckles. "You let me hate you. I let you live." The drip of water counted the silence. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, but there was nowhere left to go. Her shoulders shook once, then again. She covered her mouth to keep the sound inside. Silas reached for her in the dark. His palm found her cheek. "You should have trusted me. I trusted you to fight. That was why I could not tell you." His thumb passed beneath her eye. For 10 years he had fed the same wound until it had become part of his blood. Now the hatred had nowhere to stand. He bent his head until his brow touched hers. One hot drop struck her cheek, then another. Eleanor gripped the front of his coat. Silas gathered her against him with one good arm, crushing the ledger between their chests. "I would have gone to the rope for you," he said. "I know. That ain't love. It was all I had left to give." Above them, metal struck stone. Once, twice. Silas lifted his head. Eleanor held her breath. A man's muffled voice came through the rock. "Dig down. Thorne wants the bodies seen." The pick struck again, closer now, and Silas tightened his arm around Eleanor as dust began to fall into her hair. The pick struck again. A crack opened above Silas's shoulder. Pale light leaked through it. Eleanor stared at the wall beside her. Not granite. The blast had torn open a seam of red sandstone soft enough to flake beneath her thumbnail. She seized Silas's wrist. Not up. His eyes found hers in the dark. The west wall. Strike low. They're near. That is why. Silas pulled the broken timber free and drove its jagged end into the sandstone. The first blow left a shallow dent. The second broke away a fist-sized piece. Above them, a man laughed. Close now. Silas struck faster. Blood worked through the cloth around his arm. Eleanor scraped loose sand with both hands, widening the hole. Stone tore the skin from her fingers. The passage filled with red dust until every breath tasted of iron. A pick punched through the ceiling. Cold air rushed in. Silas drove the timber one last time. The sandstone wall gave way. Snow and daylight spilled through a narrow break. Eleanor shoved the ledger beneath her coat and crawled first. Silas followed as the ceiling cracked behind them. They slid down the far side of the ridge just as two men broke into the chamber above. A rifle fired. The ball struck stone near Eleanor's boot. Silas pulled her behind a shelf of rock. "Can you ride?" She looked at the blood running from his sleeve. "Can you?" His mouth bent at one corner. They reached the upper pasture where two half-wild horses had broken through the fence during the blast. Silas caught the gray mare by the reins. He lifted Eleanor into the saddle, then mounted behind her with one arm locked around her waist. They rode south. The storm had turned the trail into white emptiness. The mare stumbled twice. Silas's weight sagged against Eleanor's back, but each time she called his name, his hand tightened. By noon, the courthouse bell was ringing. They reached the territorial square as Sheriff Vale's men nailed the final seizure notice to the courthouse door. Inside, Elias Thorne stood beside the judge's bench, one gloved hand resting on the deed to Blackwood Ranch. "The owners are dead," he said. "The land must be secured." The oak doors slammed open. Silas filled the entrance coat-torn face streaked with blood and red dust. Every head turned. Eleanor stepped from behind him. Thorne's hand left the deed. Silas moved to her side, but she touched his chest. "Let me." He stopped. Eleanor walked to the bench and laid the leather ledger before the judge. This ranch was not poisoned by nature. Thorne gave a short laugh. A widow's guess. She placed the vial of blue crystals beside the ledger. "Copper sulfate from Blackwood Creek. I tested it with ammonia and treated paper. The concentration was too strong to come from exposed ore." The judge leaned forward. Eleanor opened the ledger to the marked page. 12 casks of blue vitriol purchased by Elias Thorne 3 weeks ago, delivered to his abandoned mine above Silas Thornton's water. Thorne's face lost color. Those records belonged to Horace Vance, and his freight seal is still on every line. She unfolded the survey map. The mine drainage meets Blackwood Creek here. Thorne fouled the water, killed the cattle, then asked the court to seize the land he had made worthless. The room went still. Eleanor turned to the judge. "Territorial Water Protection Act of 1870. A man who poisons a common watercourse forfeits claim to every parcel touched by the fraud." Judge Whitcomb looked toward Vale. "Sheriff, take Mr. Thorne into custody." Vale did not move. Silas stepped forward. The sheriff's hand dropped from his belt. Thorne backed away from the bench. "No." The judge struck the gavel. "Now." Vale reached for him. Thorne tore a revolver from beneath his coat. Silas moved, but the barrel had already found Eleanor's heart. Thorne pulled the trigger. The shot broke the room in two. Silas struck Eleanor before the smoke cleared. They went down together behind the judge's bench. His weight crushed the breath from her. For 1 second she heard nothing but the hard ringing inside her skull. Then Silas made a sound low in his throat. Her hands found his chest. Warm blood covered her fingers. "No," She tore open his coat. The silver chain lay broken across his shirt. At its end hung a dented locket, the same one she had given him beneath the cottonwood 10 years before. A dark furrow crossed his shoulder where the bullet had turned. Eleanor stared at the locket. "You kept it." Silas's face had gone gray, but his eyes held hers, couldn't seem to throw it far enough. Across the courtroom, Thorne cocked the revolver again. Sheriff Vale drove into him from the side. They struck the floor hard. The pistol skidded beneath the bench. Thorne clawed for it, but Vale twisted his arm behind his back and pressed his face against the boards. "You fool," Thorne spat. "I paid you." Vale glanced toward the judge and the crowd packed against the walls. "Not enough to hang beside you." Judge Whitcomb rose. "Bind them both." 2 deputies seized Vale before he could stand. The sheriff's mouth opened. The judge pointed at the poisoned water order still lying on the clerk's table. "You signed that lie under territorial seal." Iron closed around Vale's wrists. Eleanor barely saw it. She pressed cloth against Silas's shoulder while he watched her with the look of a man afraid to blink. "The ranch," he said, "is ours. The cattle. The ones left are waiting." His fingers closed around her wrist. "And you?" She bent until her forehead rested against his. "I am done leaving." 6 months later, spring came hard and green to Blackwood Ridge. Snowmelt ran clear over the stones. New grass covered the scars left by the blast. Calves moved through the lower pasture on unsteady legs while their mothers grazed beneath the cottonwoods. Inside the house, bread browned in the oven. Butter hissed in an iron pan. Cedar logs cracked in the hearth. The windows stood open, and the air carried wet earth, warm flour, and the clean bite of creek water. Eleanor poured tea into 2 cups. The old leather ledger rested on a shelf beside the courthouse order clearing Silas's name and restoring every acre of Blackwood Ranch. Silas came in from the pasture with mud on his boots and his healed arm stiff beneath his shirt. He stopped behind her. "You are dripping on my floor," she said. "Thought it was our floor." She turned. He had repaired the silver chain. The dented locket rested where she could see it now, no longer hidden beneath his clothes. Eleanor touched it with 1 finger. "You could have told me." "So could you." The old words carried no blade now. Silas slipped 1 arm around her waist and drew her back against him. He pressed his mouth to her hair. Outside, a calf called for its mother. The answer came from the far pasture, deep and strong. Eleanor looked through the open window at the creek cutting bright across the valley. Once every mile between them had been filled with money, fear, and 10 wasted years. Now there was only his hand spread warm across her stomach and the sound of healthy cattle moving through green grass. Silas rested his scarred cheek against her temple. "No contracts," he said. "No debts. No leaving." Eleanor covered his hand with hers. Beyond the house, Blackwood Ridge stood clear beneath the morning sun, and for the first time in 10 years, neither of them was waiting for something to be taken away.